All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back.
Hey,
Oh,
hey, good
I
to
had
see
another
ya.
video playing in the background. Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I have with me here today the wonderful, the amazing, the very interesting Bree. Bree or Bumble Bree? Which one do you
You can
prefer?
call me Bree,
Bree.
or I don't mind being called Bumblebee. I think Bumblebee is adorable. It's a nickname somebody gave me, so that made it more special to me. So I don't mind that nickname at all.
So I have
Oh,
here with me Bree of Hive Science. Bree, how about you start us off with giving us a little bit of an introduction? Tell us who you
okay.
are, what you do, a little bit about your channel.
Well, hi, I'm Bree. I'm a big nerd. I talk about science and animals and cryptozoology and all kinds of good stuff. I did work for the Missouri Department of Conservation and surveying projects and stuff in my younger years, and became a passionate environmentalist and conservationist. I try to speak for the trees, like the Lorax, if you will, and also for the animals and anything out there that doesn't have a voice to speak for itself. Because in 2022, people have become very anthropocentric with what our principles and goals are. So I try to spread my voice, and what we do on the Hive, which is my main channel, is we do a segment called Live from the Hive. We debunk a lot of silly stuff. I think Michael's favorite segment is Cryptic Corner, which I start off with at the
Love that show.
beginning of each show after I do my intro. Break into Cryptic Corner, and we look at cryptozoology or aliens or lost cities and things like that. All these woo and metaphysical ideas that aren't really supported by any evidence. We have fun with that. Then I go into Creation Watch, where I basically it's engaging with the content being put out by young Earth and flat Earth communities. Anybody who thinks that the Earth is only X amount of years old, or that it's contained within some kind of globe, things like that, I just love tackling. And then, of course, we finish that up with something. Generally, it's an environmental topic. Something that's happening in the world, something that people be aware of. It's a green segment at the end, just to wrap things up. I call it my little palate cleanser after going through whatever the Creation Watch topic was, because some of those people get pretty vitriolic.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I am also an active voice in the trans community. I am a trans woman, so you can't be a trans woman on the public square without having a strong or making your voice heard about it. Because I tried. I was like, you know what? I want to be a trans woman and just be on the internet and still talk about my bugs and science and stuff. Nope, they don't let you. You have to have a voice. You have to stand up and use it, because if you don't, they will beat you down every time. Because what you have to say about anything else is not going to matter until you let them know who you are and how they're going to have to deal with it. I did also recently launch a new channel where I talk about zoology. So if you want to just play with animals with me, go over to Battle for Gaia, where we talk about all the animals struggling for life on the surface of this living planet, and how they interact with each other. And we grade their success rates and compare them to one another. We also talk about, we have a bestiary section on the channel where we talk about the human depiction of animals throughout history, which kind of rolls right into what we're here to talk about today, which I'm going to let Michael lay it out. Yeah.
No. Yeah, if you haven't yet, please, by all means, check out Brees Channel. She's got some really awesome content. I like the cryptic corner just because I like the weird topics like that. It's a lot of fun to listen to. Good stuff. So I invited Bree here today. The topic that she chose, which I'm also very interested in, is domestication. I've got a lot of questions about this, so I'm just going to let you jump right into it. Tell us, maybe start off with kind of big picture overview of the how and why domestication occurred or started.
Okay,
how would we get into that? Yeah,
there's a few different methods of the domestication process that take place, and how that happens is a variety depending on what particular groups we're talking about. Prey, there's a difference between the way we do prey animals and herd animals, and then more recently in the way we pick animals for display, for prize animals, that we've really altered some physiological characteristics doing that, but and obviously for like lab animals and things like that. So it's a spectrum, but most of the animals that we would consider domestic today find their origins in prehistory. There are a few that have been domesticated in historical time, of course, but for the majority of them, this was a process that just happened naturally through what we call in science symbiosis, where two organisms both gain cohabitating together and adjust their biology and behavior to accommodate one another. Now, this is a mutualistic relationship on its surface, but as we dive deeper into it, and as a species becomes more domesticated to living with humans, their viability outside of human protection, that it can be completely lost. There are several species that wouldn't survive in the wild now on domestic dogs. And speaking of dogs, that's where we begin our journey, right? With the good boys. Now, dogs, you would say that dogs domesticated themselves more so, or that, because you could almost say that we domesticated ourselves right alongside dogs too, because the way that our divergence from our wild living ancestors happened was right around the same time, right around the same process. Dogs have been there with us since before we were domesticated. We still lived a wild life, hunter-gatherer. Before we developed agriculture, the dogs were there. Dogs originally, they were a species of wolf. It's thought that they were domesticated somewhere in the Russian steppe area. But there's a few genetic groups of wolves that have contributed over the generations, so it's hard to say for sure which group is the prominent one that was impacting the way that these creatures developed in the direction that their evolution took under human guidance. And the domestication process in and of itself is really us as a species taking the natural tools for that are present in nature to change over time for an organism, and selectively applying pressure onto the development of the organisms in order to get the outcome we like. So we selectively breed organisms. There's no nature taking out the weaker. So an organism with features that might not be viable in nature, we can propagate those characteristics genetically speaking, we can do it even with recessive genes, which is we'll get into that later on when we talk about goldfish and koi specifically, because that's the good example of taking something that's very recessive in the gene pool and bringing it out through selective pressures, that show that any of these mutations in your genetics that cause certain, whether it's color change, whether it's the proportions of limbs, sometimes it's whether they will lay eggs manically out of season, which is what happened with chickens and how we got those domesticated. But I'm getting ahead of myself and talking about all these other animals, and I'm supposed to be focusing on the dogs at the moment. So let's say that the primary source of the ancestry of the wolf ancestor of domestic dogs is extinct. They're not directly the direct ancestors of dogs are not from any extant population of wolves, though there has been genetic insertions, if you will, from wild wolf populations into the gene pools throughout history. So a dog's gene is dirty, and there's certain characteristics of a domesticated genome that we can see, and it's the way that there's these artificial bottlenecks that just are just laid out through the history, where we can see, this breeding population was isolated here and bred together to get these results for these characteristics, and then retroactively taken back and bred with this other population that split off and were bred for these characteristics. And we can actually build like family trees, and it's more of a expression of the tree of life than anything that you can see up on a board is just looking at the way that we've bred canines. So canines are just the perfect example of selective breeding in the way that genetics work for artificial selection, which is what humans are doing and what nature we can see doing outside. But we can guide it, we can control it, we can cause enough change that if you found a pug skull and you found a mastiff skull 2 million years from now, you would say these were different species. We don't call them different species because we draw the lines, because we as humans draw the circles to say, it falls under this category. So anyway, so the domestication process of wolves to dogs specifically is orders of magnitude longer than any other domestication process that we know of. The beginning time frame for the earliest domestication of wolves, whether they were dog-like wolves or wolf-like dogs, there's mostly remains found in the mammoth steppe, is where we find a lot of the remains of these kind of in-between organisms, right? And they started off as following us around, stealing our kills or raiding our waste bins, and we would follow them too because they were good at running down prey like we were. That's something that humans and canines have so much in common, is that our hunting technique is this a long distance pursuit predator. We as a species are the most efficient animals on Earth at doing that long distance pursuit. That's why we were so successful, and that's why we were able to drive all the megafauna to extinction. But we weren't alone when we were driving that megafauna to extinction, because we had our little pursuit predators with us. Now, they weren't as big and tough as the timber wolves or gray wolves out on the steppe, but together between us and these smaller, their ancestors were more scavenger like. They were not they weren't these. I mean, obviously, like I said, they did get insertions at some point with their larger wolf cousins as well. But to start, the wolves that we had initially domesticated were pretty small, similar in size to like a Iberian wolf. So around the size of a German Shepherd, not as big as a wild wolf. When you think about a wolf, when you think about a gray wolf, they were smaller. But yeah, they were good at keeping up with us. They didn't mind long distance travels. They would harass our prey and cause it to get exhausted faster, which is what, we would do too. But it's, we didn't, throw a spear at a mammoth and it just died.
Right.
We would spear it and it would bleed out, and we would harass it and follow it around for days or weeks. Not giving it any rest, because we're a pursuit predator, and these wolves were too. And they would yap and bark, and as time went on, we would direct them more towards offering different services. Some of them were good at chasing prey down, so while other ones maybe were just at home, stayed around the house, ate scraps, barked when strangers approached, and kept your kids company while you were out hunting. Maybe you had a dog that did that, and you had a dog that you went hunting with too. So now we have different jobs for different dogs, and breeding them for different temperaments and characteristics based on what we want them to do. We want little cuter ones to stay at home, but we want them to be allowed because we want them to alert us when strangers are approaching. They're your alarm dog and your pet. And then you got your hunting dogs and work dogs that helped you maintain your herds, because we're going to get into that right now, because suddenly we had these. Everybody had dogs, and everybody had success suddenly, and all the in between that and this dramatic climatic change, right? All of a sudden, the prey items are shifting. There's new competition. We with the dogs, because we started domesticating dogs while there were still other hominids around. Dogs helped us leave Neanderthals in the dust. It's like, you know what? We got dogs. You don't. You're done. We're taking over from here. So we bred and fought and wiped out our competition, and we came in with our dogs, and we spread all over the globe. By this time, we were at every corner of the earth. This is why we extend. We are almost implied to extend the beginning process of domestication back as far as we do, not because we have specific genetic evidence, but because we know humans had dogs as far back as the Bering Land Bridge, right? As the Bering Strait, the land was called Beringia, and that's where people originally crossed. But we know that we had dogs when we crossed because the Native Americans had their own genetically distinct groups of dogs. So we know that at that point in time, we didn't just have, it wasn't just wolves that were following us around. We had individual breeds of dogs with specific jobs, and food dogs too that we kept in case we needed to eat them. When times were scarce, you keep a dog there to eat the scraps, so you didn't have a stinking pile of scraps next to your camp, and also fatten them up. And then when winter rolls around and you didn't get enough game over the winter, you could eat the dog. The dog breeds of the Polynesians were really good for that. They called them poi dogs. They would keep them and eat them when in times of scarcity. Now, so we have humans spreading, and even all the way down from the tip of Australia up to Alaska, Greenland. We had dogs everywhere by the beginning of the Holocene. That's the beginning of the Common Era that we live in since the 10,000 BC, basically, since the end of the Ice Age. But before that Ice Age ended completely, though, we did domesticate one other species, at least in some areas we did. The next species that we are going to talk about, and having dogs on our side, made it so it was even possible for us to... give me a second, I'll clear my...
It's okay. I was going to ask you a quick question.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, all right. So I'm trying to get this straight in my head. So, domestication of agriculture of plants happens 12,000 years ago, 10,000 BCE. Domestication of dogs happened prior to that. On the little chart you gave, I think you have 15,000.
That's more about the spread. It began. That's why I say orders of magnitude. It began some estimates of 37 thousand years ago. So we've been domesticating dogs for almost 20,000 years.
Wow.
So,
and as you kind of said before, this domestication resulted from this kind of partnership, this kind of I don't know if symbiotic's the right biological
mutualism,
term.
at least, though, right?
Mutual relationship. How did that affect the evolution of dogs?
Well, yeah, they were no longer sculpted in their biology from natural selection, from pressures like a dog with what we would consider genetic, or what nature would have considered a genetic defect and removed from the gene pool. In domestic dogs, that didn't necessarily get removed from the gene pool. As a matter of fact, we could select for it, we could breed for it, we could encourage that to happen. And we're going to talk about the early stages of that when we get to the end here, because there's I'm sure you know about the silver foxes. So if anybody's here to hear about the silver foxes, we will get to the silver foxes. They're at the end, okay? They're the last piece that we're going to talk about, because they're the last species that we've officially domesticated. So we're going to talk about those, what kind of changes. We're going to talk about neoteny, and even in the behavioral changes to infantile behavior that we see in domestic dogs. Because domestic dogs are cute little doggos. As sweet and loving as they are, they never grow up. They never their behavior never becomes that of an adult dog. Unfortunately, but and that depends on the breed too. Some of them will have more mature behavior, but the domestication of dogs, especially working dogs, that allowed us to domesticate so many other animals, including the very next one I have on the list here. As a matter of fact, I think it's the next. Yeah, the next. Boom, boom. Yeah, the next like 6 things. So for the first one was goats. Okay. Now, when you look at a goat's ancestor, right? When you look at where they come from, like what species that they've descended from, these animals are intimidating. You wouldn't want to approach one in the wild, right? Yeah. They're not cute. They are. I don't know. Go if you look up. What's the Bezoar ibex, or any other ibex for that matter, any of these wild goat species. Yeah, well, I can pull it up here. Let me see. Let me share my screen real quick. I guess I could have been doing that while I was talking about dogs too. Let's see. Here is, yeah, the Bezoar ibex. So look at these. Look at this beast. This monster horns.
How big are they?
Let's see. It's got the measurements on here. Let's go back and look. So they get about 4'7" tall. So
wow,
about the size of a goat, but like a battle goat. Look at those. Look at those horns.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is that doing that? There we go. All right. You can unshare me now. There we go. Okay. So we would not have been able to master these creatures without having dogs. So what we would do at the time that like he was talking about a second ago, agriculture. This is the same time period, about 13,000 to 9,000 years ago, depending on what region they were in. There was different agricultural revolutions in different parts of the world. I didn't bring any plant material today. I'm sorry. Domestic animals are a topic to cover in and of themselves. Maybe we could do a follow-up about domestic crops too.
Yeah.
Fruits and vegetables and whatnot. And we could, and I love to talk about, and I bore people to death when I talk about it, the history of banana cultivars. So that's a derpy topic I like to talk about. Anyhow, but there's so many animals to go over, and so many different methods of domestication that we understand to be the origins of these creatures. Now, goats, of course, started off as a food source, right? As ibex were something that we hunted and ate. But as more humans began to populate the area and we settled down and started staying in one location more often, we started to develop hunting territories, right? That we patrolled. This is my group's territory, and the animals that live in this territory are mine. So you would have, maybe a rocky outcrop where a herd of goats lived that was within your territory, and you would patrol around that area, make sure no other humans and no other predators, for that matter, would come in and snag your ibex that are living on these cliffs in your territory. So as that developed, and with the dogs helping us to patrol these wider areas to control more territory and in turn keep our livestock contained, at least within our territory, we used these animals. We used our dogs. So with goats and sheep, which is I'm just going to lump them kind of together because they sort of have a similar history. It's just the goats went towards living in more rocky areas, and they have a more varied diet, whereas sheep were focused on open grasslands and focused mainly on grazing. They can both graze, but goats can also go buck wild and eat just about anything else, as we know. So that's goats even today, people use them for keeping plants and weeds and stuff under control, because they'll eat just about anything they can get their tongue around. Anything green anyway, and they'll eat some stuff that they shouldn't eat too, which it did lead to. There's a lot of mythology wrapped up in this stuff, but goats, the idea that goats could eat like tin cans and stuff, is Titan
I've heard that before.
Out there going nuts about the banana stuff too.
Yeah, he really wants to talk about plants. Yeah, I told him we'll do a part 2. So
yeah, we could do a part 2. I'm down for that. So where was I? Goats and sheep. Okay, so yeah, we were able to use our animals to control the goats and the sheep, and then we could selectively breed them, and people still today live this lifestyle with just having free range ovids and caprids, which is the sheep and goat groups, and there are just a variety of breeds, but they all kind of link back to the same gene pool, and just a little bit of this species of ibex here, a little bit of that species of goat there, or breed of goat there, and just mixing and matching and making these specific organisms. Now, our ability to control large groups, especially of sheep, was instrumental to the ability to develop a trade network, right? Between sheep and, as we talked about with the plant cultivation, suddenly there was commodity and demand for something that somebody else was, maybe you're growing this breed of tomatoes, and this group's breeding another breed, and same thing with the sheep. You're breeding these ones which produce this really great wool, right? But these other people are breeding this other kind of sheep that tastes freaking delicious or produce this much more meat. So you trade some of your sheep with some of their sheep. There are still some the early sheep that were first domesticated. There's still some genetically isolated groups on islands in the mostly in the northern European area, and some of them, I think there's some in the Mediterranean too. But they show you what kind of how the wool was before we genetically bred it, because they used to have, you could just pluck it out. So like if you look at Soe Island or Soe sheep, which is an island in the St. Kilda island chain, which has really been isolated up there for a long time, and the people who settled there lived there 5,000 years ago. That's why I was talking with somebody about history the other day. I can't remember what the topic was, but I mentioned something about asking if it was the Picts that would have lived the
I remember that.
Britons that would have lived 5,000 years ago in St. Kilda, and they said no, that they didn't come until like the early Iron Age.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? So who lived?
You're asking the wrong person there. Ancient history, not my cup of tea, but
Okay, sorry.
not my specialty. No, you're good.
I'm just thinking out loud, really.
No, let me ask you a follow-up question here.
Uh-huh.
So with the domestication of goats and sheep, I mean, so just to get back to my timeline, it says, is that a 4 or 5? My eyesight's failing me. Or 9,000.
Let's see.
Goats and sheep. I think that's 10,000. Sheep,
I have my
9,000.
timeline right here. Hold on. So yeah, I made it. I can't remember which is on there. So for goats, it's about 10,000 BC or BCE, before Common Era. For sheep, it was about 9,000 before Common Era.
Yeah.
So they were both within that same time frame that we were developing a relationship with the plants in the area too, and crossbreeding and cross-pollinating, things like that. And the ability to breed specific cereal plants was also beneficial to our ability to cultivate larger livestock, because we could make sure everybody's getting well fed and find out which group has the genetics to be the biggest, and keep those individuals and that produce the most meat, and the ability to bulk feed them with agriculturally developed cereal plants. That was instrumental, right?
So with the respectively the domestication of goat and sheep, you said that at first goats are being used primarily for food. When do we start to see the use of like secondary products, so to speak? Like, so for example, the goat's milk and the sheep's wool, like, is that happening?
Yes, that's
simultaneously, or
all these things are slowly starting to develop, and and once we were able to settle down and control our populations of the animals, right, then we could start working towards developing this breed for wool and this breed for milk. Goats were the first the OG milk that humans started to consume. That's I think that's where our symbiote, and I don't have any of the genetic papers pulled up. I find that if I start citing peer-reviewed papers, people start to fall asleep. So I just
this is the channel for it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the genes that we developed to consume and process lactose in our bodies, as the Western populations anyway, the reason we developed that and the ability to develop that was symbiotic with eating goats and consuming their milk. And actually, the earliest way we made cheese was keeping milk in a bladder, right? And the with the coagulates on the inside the bladder was kept in there for days. Caused the cultures to grow that we call cheese today. So that's how cheese was developed, and it was at the same time period. This early days of agriculture. Oh my gosh! Now I'm going to get into because we domesticated. So when we made cheese, we domesticated bacteria too. We didn't know it, and that's so amazing. We didn't know it. We domesticated yeast and bacteria and all this stuff. We didn't know what we were doing, but we domesticated and we created specific gene pools and kept them going. So there's strains of cheese. I don't know if strains is the right right term for it, but that have been passed down through this culture being maintained over generations, over hundreds and hundreds of years, because we domesticated those as well. Hell, now we're gonna have to do a third show about domestication of cheese, which is cultures that form on dairy. Yeah, but yes, goat milk is more similar to human milk. Like like Titan was saying there, in its nutritional value, because and that links back to cows being grazers like the sheep, and goats being more generalist, more closer related to the diet of a person. So there's definitely yes, we're getting there next, Robbie. Yes. Okay. So that is the so far we've talked about canids and ovids and caprids, which are the sheep and goats respectively. The next creatures that were domesticated were the suids, which are pigs. So all modern domestic pigs are descended from European wild boars, which big hairy monstrosities with razor tusks that not something you would to be trifled with.
Yeah, boars are intense. I didn't know that. Yeah.
It's another situation where it's something I can't see how we would have been able to do it before canine domestication. So, I mean, the pigs aren't herd animals, so the dogs are not having the same response to them that they have to goats and sheep. Pigs will fight you. Wild pigs will fight you. So we had to actually use it. It's believed that we used a completely different method of domestication for pigs than what we did for goats and sheep and cattle, because you weren't going to be able to contain and control adult hogs. I mean, we are struggling to do that in the South right now, but you can capture and or kidnap, if you will, piglets and raise them in captivity, and they will very much treat you like you're part of the family when they grow up. You will be a member of their pack. So they're more similar to dogs in that respect. That the early domestication process did involve a bonding with them, but when it comes to pigs, they do they do not maintain that childlike temperament when they reach adulthood. So you could have a pig and keep it like a dog. And I'm talking about these early what they call them, iron boars. Let me see here. I had a page pulled up about it a second ago. Oh goodness, not llamas. We're not ready for llamas yet.
We're getting there.
Are you ready for llamas?
I love llamas personally, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, here we are. So there's with pigs, the genetics on them is really interesting too, because the way because again, they're not free range. You don't keep pigs as free range like you do cattle and sheep and goats, but so the genetic populations were able to become isolated, but to give us the opportunity to view neoteny in the physical form really bad when you start selectively breeding them to be bigger and beefier and fatter, maintain that supple baby skin, and then we get our giant big fat white pigs that are just nothing but walking meat. Now while the pig did undergo that particular change, they're not the last animal that we're going to see happen that happened to in the domestication process, but they are definitely the largest animal to go through as much physiological change from the domestication process in comparison to their wild ancestors. There's more physical differences between the anatomy of a wild boar and a domestic pig than there are between any other animal that size. The interesting thing about that, though, is that released into the wild, they will return to the furry, tusked monstrosities within just a few generations and be almost identical to their wild ancestors, except for some skeletal differences. other than some skeletal differences, you wouldn't be able to tell you weren't looking at a wild boar. So that just goes to show the power of epigenetics to control your development and characteristics based on your environment. We'll see that again with cats too, because while cats don't go through a lot of physiological changes, that's one that we do get to witness, is how they can be very different depending on what the environment that they're growing up in is. All right.
Before we get to the worst domesticated animal ever, let's talk about cows.
Yeah, cows were definitely next on the list, because I guess you're not a cat fan.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, where was I? Oh, so before we move away from sewage, though, there was one other thing I wanted to talk about. So, and this is way in the future. So we're not on the timeline anymore. We're jumping off the timeline for just a minute we're going to jump off the main timeline, and we're going to pop over to South America, and we're going to pop up to about what would have been their sort of their Bronze Age, but it was much later than ours. And they started domesticating peccaries, which are not related to our pigs, and they fill the ecological niche, but they are like the New World's answer to Old World pigs. They are called peccaries, and they are distinct and they look very specific, and are a little bit smaller than pigs. You okay? You're frozen.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at. I didn't know what a peccary was, so I had to.
Yeah, they do look like pigs. They look like little floofy. Well, not floofy. Their hair is kind of bristly, but they're completely furry, and they like 45% of their body is head, but they're kind of cute, but they don't have the same docile temperament as our domestic pigs, but they had started to go down the domestication process. The thing about it that I wanted to mention was that they had totally abandoned it so early on because we brought pigs over. So they're like, hey, you know what? We don't need to try to domesticate these anymore. But we're going to talk about South America's bizarre domesticated animals in detail as we move along. But let us pop on into cattle, because when it comes to a variety of domestication, cattle takes the cake, because domestic cattle is not just, and you can consider goats and sheep cattle too, technically speaking, but generally what we're talking about is boss, which is cows, but there's also some buffalo that fall into this category too, the zebu. There are a few animals that will that will be considered cattle or domestic cows. Now, the domestication process is not much different than what we went through with sheep, but the weird thing to understand about cows is that the ancestor that we domesticated them from was not, it didn't look like what we see as cows now. It looked more like what you'd see, very, very similar to like a Spanish fighting bull. They were huge, muscular animals with large horns that were highly aggressive. So there are now, when it comes to things like there's like buffalo that we have domesticated now that are not. Be right back.
Yeah, no worries. Bree will return here shortly. But yeah, kind of the question that I was talking about before, or the question I was asking, it seems like that at different points of this timeline, so we have Neolithic Revolution that happens 10,000 BCE, which primarily refers to the domestication of agriculture. But the reason why I wanted Bree to talk about this as in depth as she is because corresponding with agriculture is the domestication of animals. And I'm curious with cattle, especially when we get the use of animal labor. So I know the use of animals for food is obviously what happens first. And then the use of secondary animal products, milk, hair, wool, used for the construction of tools, even used of animal bones and skins for warmth, clothing, that sort of thing. But I'm curious to know, and of course I'll ask Bree when she gets back. Curious to know when animal labor starts to get utilized. When do we start to employ animals to do the jobs that we were doing, the agricultural work, the muscle? I'm not sure. Well, I guess it starts with dogs helping us hunt, but
okay, sorry about that. I did hear what you were saying while I was up there talking, so I did kind of hear where you were going. You were talking about so yeah, it definitely happened way before any ungulates were domesticated, because we had dogs as pack animals way before we were using them to pull. They'd pull sleds, or they'd carry things on their backs, or they'd pull flets, the poles with the leather strapped over top of them with all your junk on it. Dogs were capable of doing that. Now, we did domesticate animals to do labor, to pull things, before we domesticated them to carry humans at all. So that was definitely where it started, and it did start with bovids, buffalo, yaks. Oh my gosh, there's so many that were, and these are distinct groups too that were domesticated independently. That's why bovids are the quintessential domestic livestock. They are the animal that you go to for to try to make anything, to make any kind, whether it's to use for milk, to use for food, to use for breedings, for sports. Cows are used in more sports than any other animal, obviously, right? Even more than dogs. There are more sports that involve cows than horses, which is kind of surprising, but yeah. Anyway, there are definitely a crossover between the domestication of horses and the domestication of cows, though, and or the domestication of equids in general. But let's go over the different organisms that have been turned into cattle. So first, you have the auroch. The European auroch was a huge rusty colored animal with massive horns, and it was built like a Spanish fighting bull scaled up. It was really a force to be reckoned with. So that's where our domestic cows come from, like what you see in a field. Now, as far as work animals, so there's the zebu, which it does serve the same kind of purpose to the cows that are from European descent, but they are a bit distinct. Sometimes they'll call them Brahmin cattle, but yeah, zebu. Like the sacred cows are zebu, but all cows are sacred, of course, in that belief system. But that's the when you see a symbol of the sacred cow, it's generally a zebu. So, I guess, is that the first time that we touched on religious iconography with symbolism?
Yes.
So far.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, the other animals that we talked about up above, they were. They all have their symbolism too, but yeah, I think when it comes to the zebu, that's what's always stands out to me. Let's see, what else do we have as far as cattle goes? Water buffaloes. Domestic water buffaloes don't look much different at all from their wild counterpart, but they do behave quite a bit differently. If you've ever heard anybody talk about experiencing like when they go over to Asia or Africa, having an experience with water buffaloes, they're they're famously aggressive, but the domestic water buffaloes really aren't, and they are used as a beast of burden, like you talked about. But we didn't really see, we don't really have a strong record of them before. I mean, they're no older than cities, I guess you would say, that we had cities before they were domesticated. So with the rest of the cattle we're looking at so far, they've all been domesticated before, like in prehistoric time, I guess you would say. I'm trying to find the right terminology for these periods, because I could pull my my timeline back up. Now, what time period were we at?
Just talked about cows.
Make sure there's no cows I missed. Hold on, or no cattle I missed. Yeah, the Bali cattle were descendant from the Javan Banteng. They are also a labor animal, or a draft animal. The Gale, famously a draft animal. They're descendant from the Guar, and the Guar is they're also known as the Indian bison. Are huge. They are massive animals and super strong. I know that I missed some though, because I know that we have domesticated the yak, right? Where's the yak?
Yak is right above the camel there, I believe.
Well, I have my list here though that I made.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking. There it is. Domestic yak. That was 2500 BC. Tibet and Nepal. Definitely used as a draft animal. You know, definitely used as a pack animal and a riding animal. And a similar domestication process that we had with them is it's kind of because they crossed that threshold, right, between how we domesticate cattle and how we domesticated sheep and goats, because we did use them for their coats as well. We bred them and raised them to be to make clothes out of their fur. So they kind of crossed that threshold between domestic cattle and domestic sheep and goats. All right, I think that should wrap us up for the cattle. All right, and then next, I know you didn't want to talk about it, but I'm going to rope another couple of critters in here with the cats as well, as we talk about this subject, because I think that there are some other organisms that have filled that niche to some extent, some that made the list and some that didn't, because their domestication was directly abandoned because cats were better at it. But the first and foremost, we're going to talk about cats, which are descendant from African wild cats, which Felis liberica. The cats that we have today are all descendant, at least in part, from that group, though there has been, like with the other, like what we talked about with the wolves, with other groups of Felis wild cats. This does include the European wild cat, Pallas cat, quite a few different creatures contributing to the gene pool, but for the most part, they are African wildcat descendant. Now, famously, this happened in Egypt. You know, we know that they had domestic cats as part of their chemical, as part of their cultural iconography, right? But we know that cats were around in the Mediterranean well before, like domestic cats were around well before that. We have and we know this because there's cats on islands and things in the Mediterranean. They didn't get there by themselves. We bring cats with us when we travel. That is part of the problem. That's the big part of the problem with cats. So cats are literally, for what they do, they're rodent control. We kept them and kept them around and cultivated them, and because they were perfect at killing rodents and pest birds too, but for the most part rodents that were getting into our grain stores, that were eating our food. And it just, we just come out of this agricultural age. Now, cats weren't the only organisms that we did this with. We did this with what we call a polecat in Europe, because polecats, while the European wildcats were not so friendly in Northern Europe, and they were quite a bit bigger and more aggressive than African wildcats. Instead, they used polecats. Now, polecats are the ancestors of ferrets. So there's another group that was used for the same purpose. Now, it's pest control around the farm, around the village, whatever. Now, cats were just so super good at it that other than as a sports animal, the polecat never really took off as the pest control household animal the way cats did, and they just spread to every corner of the world. And unfortunately, wherever they go, they do what they do best, and they control the rodents and the birds and the lizards and any other little small animal that they can grab their little paws around, because they're so good at it. And they will wipe out entire populations, entire islands of endemic creatures have gone extinct because of this instinct that the cats had, that we bred into them because they were so good. We kept them around, kept them to protect our food stores from rodents. We honed these perfect killing machines, and then we released them onto the world. It's funny, people like you watch the new Jurassic Park, while they're like, "Oh, dinosaurs get loose. We're gonna on the world. It's gonna change everything. It's gonna be like the apocalypse." I'm like, no, not really. Dinosaurs are megafauna. They probably wouldn't be too much of a problem. It's the microfauna that you got to be careful about. And cats we released onto the world, and it was not ready for them. No place was safe. They wiped out genre of organisms. But I don't hate cats. I don't even dislike cats. I love cats. I don't know. I understand people who don't like cats. They're kind of assholes, but
I mean, compared to dogs, there's
well, it's because of our relationship with them too. We brought dogs into our family. We hired cats. We hired them for
that's a good way of thinking of it.
Like, hey, can you guard this grain bin over here? Where the dogs were like, let's go hunting. It's like a different relationship, right? A different way we founded that relationship. So they were to the dog, your dad. To the cat, you're like their coworker. You're like, you bring the food home, I'll protect it from the rodents. So, ferrets were on that list as well. The domestication of ferrets, to what we know today, happened much, much later, though, because what we consider the use of a domestic ferret is a hunting animal. So it's mostly to drive rabbits out of their holes. In modern times, that was what their original use in selective breeding was initially for. Obviously, they're adorable and make absolutely wonderful companions, in my opinion. I love ferrets. I love their bouncy little personalities and all that good stuff. But when it comes to domestication, none of these creatures could compete with the cat. The other one that stands out is another feliform, which was the mongoose, that was released and spread for the same reasons, and actually did become an invasive species as well, because up until the early Middle Ages, mongooses and cats were kind of on par with each other, depending on where you were from, what your household pet would be, because mongooses have the same kind of behavioral traits as cats, because they're feliforms, just the same. They spread a bit. And like I said, ferrets were much later, but they kind of fill that same domestic animal niche. So Moving on from that, what are we looking at next? We did cats. There's no good segue from cats into roosters is the problem.
Yeah.
So the funny thing about the domestication of the red jungle fowl, which is the ancestor of modern chickens, is that we as Western cultures, European descendants, I talk about myself there, did not know for a long time where they came from. We just didn't. There was no pedigree, no lineage. When we discovered them, they'd already been domesticated for generations. But chickens, 6,000 years ago, they were domesticated. Southeast Asia. It was just a happenstance of domestication. The original use was actually not for meat; it was for egg production. Because chickens live in this type of forest it's bamboo forest, the same place that giant pandas come from. But the thing about bamboo forest is that it experiences these dieback periods that aren't annual; they're on a different cycle that's over certain decades. So the chickens reproduce at a normal rate with low feed, but if you bulk feed them, their body is naturally responding to that driver that says that it's part of this natural cycle that we go through, where the bamboo dies back, and it's a smorgasbord of food, and that's when we produce a whole bunch of chickens, right? So they have this natural response. Humans living in the area started to pick up on that, and noticed that the hens, when they were in this stage, would lay eggs, whether they hatched or not. They just lay eggs and eggs and eggs, more than they would lay eggs more than they were able to breed. So they were producing a lot of extra eggs, and at some point, we started to notice that we could manufacture this response in the birds, which is learned behavior just from observing how they are in nature, similar to the way that we observed how different plants respond to different ecological stimulus to produce bigger and better fruit, for instance. So just the same situation with chickens, with the chicken and the egg, right? And so they were domesticated, really early on, and for a long time that was their main purpose. And then they were very popular as sports animals too. As I mentioned, the cattle, but chickens are also used in sports. Chicken fighting is like I know here in the U.S. it's not a big deal, but in other countries, especially less developed countries, it's a real, it's like football in some places. And there are specific breeds of chicken that are bred to fight that look insane. They have a tiny little body and big giant legs. And then there's chickens that are bred for meat, and they have huge, humongous bodies and tiny legs and tiny heads. And there's chickens that have wings that can't lift them off the ground. There's chickens that can fly for short distances. There are chickens that are specifically bred to lay eggs in bulk. There are chickens that there are chicken species that the FDA deemed cruel because the way that they grew was detrimental to their health. And they were used in factory farms. So chicken's a really plastic species. And when we discovered them, it was in embarrassingly recently. I don't have a timestamp. I'm sorry. I thought I did, but I don't. But it was embarrassingly recently when we figured out where they came from, because they still live in their natural environment in bulk. They just didn't ever pay attention because they're chickens. Look, there's chickens. They're all chickens. We discovered that that's the main ancestor. There's the red jungle fowl and a little bit of the gray jungle fowl mixed in there. They all live in Southeast Asia. And yeah, so the next thing on the list is kind of unexpected, that it would be on the list at all, yet alone that it would be domesticated so early, because we're going to go 5,000 years ago. Remember I said South America had some weird animals that they decided to domesticate? They didn't have a lot of food animals, but they did have one that was that was very unique. Can you guess what I'm talking about?
I'm trying to look at the chart. Don't tell me it's a guinea pig.
Uh-huh.
Really?
Yes.
For food? I didn't know that.
Because guinea pigs, ironically, a lot like pigs, and a little bit like dogs too, that we could fence them off, just catch them and block them off, and bulk feed them with scraps left over, so that in time of scarcity or just when they're finally plump enough, we could eat them. Guinea pig's supposed to be delicious. I've never tried it, but there's actually a wild guinea pig that still exists called the montane guinea pig that's in the Andes. So a lot of the Andean culture is tied in with guinea pigs specifically because they were such a significant part of their agriculture. They have if you ever look it up, you can see little guinea pig farms. It's like they kind of look like gardens with because there's little walls that are about this tall around them, just little knee-high fences, and in there's just little herds of guinea pigs running around with straw, and they bulk feed them like alfalfa and stuff, and table scraps, and yeah, they still farm them down there. They're also used as pets, and guinea pigs there's a reason why we use the term guinea pig the way we do, because they were the first rodent that we started to use as lab animals, and it was specifically because they bred so well, they kept so well in captivity. I don't want to specifically say it was the Incas, because I think that the domestication of guinea pigs actually predates that Peruvian culture by quite a long time, because by the time that we got to the New World, by the time that Western culture got over here and discovered what was going on, they had already spread they were in the Caribbean, up into Mexico, all throughout South America. They were spread as a livestock animal. So by that point, they had reached every corner of South America, and were starting to become more common in the Caribbean and in Central and North America. So who knows what would have happened if we hadn't showed up with our livestock and kind of that's what they did. They nixed all these domestication programs that they had going on in the New World. It's like, oh, we have our own domestic pigs. Never mind, they got big fat pigs. We'll just eat those. And then, oh, we got these domestic small rodents. Oh, well, these chickens produce meat and they lay eggs. Oh, well, scrap the guinea pigs but we did salvage them though, because people thought they were super cute, and we brought them back to Europe, and they would, like, during the Victoria era, it was very common for like aristocrats to have pet guinea pigs, and they'd often hold them in their fancy paintings with their big Victorian collars. They'll be holding a guinea pig as a sign of nobility, because they'd have them imported from the New World. So
that's funny.
And yeah, that's the history of the guinea pig. So they had a food history, but dogs also had a food history in that area of the world. So the dogs were kept the same. That's why they liked little fat dogs like Chihuahuas. Just to be clear, I know Chihuahuas aren't considered a fat dog now, but they were a little rotund dog back when they would look like they originally looked. It's the selective breeding that Europeans put them under that made them what they are today, which is not the same thing. But they were Native American dogs are an interesting breeds, but they're all gone. They call them first contact dogs. There's a Trey the Explainer video that goes into it in really detail. It'll also make you cry to think about these unique species, I guess breed would be a better word for it. These unique breeds of dogs that lived in the New World Native Americans had, that descended from the dogs that they brought over across Beringia
Wow.
25,000 years ago. That when we brought our Eurasian dogs over with us, immediately bred them out. They just disappeared. We totally wiped out the gene pool, so there's nothing left of them. Chihuahuas are one of the few that survive, actually. And even the Chihuahua has more genes from a domestic ancestor than it does from a first contact, or from a, what do they call them, first contact dogs, or I think that's the right word for it. Anyway, I don't know how I got back on talking about dogs. You keep rubbing me back into talking about dogs, and I'll talk about dogs all day. But we were talking about guinea pigs, which are cute too. The next thing on the list is an ass. So, yeah, and that's the same time. And so you think about donkeys, and donkeys play a big role in Hebrew tradition. So I do spend a lot of time talking about because I like the ancient Near East mythology, but it does put the Messiah riding in on a donkey is a big part of the mythology, right? But donkeys have only been domesticated about the same amount of time as guinea pigs. So maybe, yeah.
Why the separation between the horse and the donkey? More of a
because they were
geographical type
domesticated
thing?
from different groups of animals. Because they were domesticated from for different purposes as well.
Okay.
Donkeys were domesticated as draft animals first to pull things. There are a few different ancestors, but it's mostly African wild asses that make up the ancestry to modern donkeys and to donkeys that you see in Egypt and in the Middle East. Donkeys spread pretty far though because they're strong. For their size, they're very strong, very good at pulling things. The agricultural revolution, as it happened in Africa, happened on the back of an ass. So they were important in the same way that, like you were talking about, how cattle were used as draft animals to pull plows and things in Europe. Horses did get used for that, but horses, kind of funny thing about horses is they were more of a food animal at first too. Donkeys, I don't know if there's, I never really looked into it honestly, but whether there was a big market for donkey meat. I imagine they were edible, that people eat them. Yeah, it looks like on this list here that they do list them as being used for meat. But another thing that we haven't talked about when we're talking about all this domestication of cattle and now equids too is manure is so important to agriculture as well, and the ability to use the manure as fuel for to help keep our society burning. As we were developing early on, there were, if you had a manure wagon and you went around and sold manure to people to burn in their fires to keep their houses warm in the winter, you could make a pretty penny off that. It didn't in cattle manure and horse manure, all great for that purpose. So, and other purposes too, obviously fertilizer and to a lesser extent ceramics. But we won't talk about that right now, unless you want to talk about manure ceramics. We can dive into that. But yeah, with the donkey though, it's there's another animal that comes up on the list here in a minute that we'll talk about. That I think history is strangely like that of a donkey. But yeah, moving on, because equids are gonna be covered again when we talk about horses, right? Domestic ducks are derived from mallards. If you know what a mallard is, they're the ones that have the male has the green head and the female's kind of brownish gray. And the male has like iridescent feathers on his wings and stuff. It's quintessential mallard duck, right? That's what our big white ducks come from. They're actually just a subspecies of that. So your farm ducks said 4,000 years ago in China, they said yum. Now they aren't the only ducks that were domesticated though, because in the New World, not too long after about 700 BC. Again, we're traveling forward in time a little bit, not quite sticking with the timeline, but just because there was 2 independent duck domestication events. There was also the Muscovy duck, which it was domesticated in the New World by Native Americans, and they did find their way into European cuisine as well. But just another group of distinct ducks. They can actually be crossbred with European ducks as well. But they have spread throughout the world. A lot of not a lot of game animals, or sorry, not game animals, domestic animals, food animals, I guess I should say, that from the New World made it into the mainstream, but the Muscovy duck did. Most of the animals, like I said, most of the animals that they were working on domesticating for food, the market kind of dried up when Europeans arrived with their more derived domestic species that had been in cultivation for thousands of years, pigs and cows and such. All right, so moving on from the ducks, let's see here. Talked about water. Oh, we get to camels next. Now, camels were the original mounted steed because they were domesticated before horses. They were domesticated in Arabia for their ability to travel long distances. So if you could grab a camel, you could help you avoid having to walk miles and miles across the desert, because when you live in a desert, you travel a lot. And if you're keeping herds, if you have herd animals like cattle or goats, you could actually acclimate a baby camel to that being its herd, and it will live among them as a camel, or as if it was they were camels too, and protect them. But you can also ride them. So double usage there, and something that not all horses do, or some of the horses don't do as naturally as camelids do anyway, because camels aren't the only things that do this. Llamas, alpacas, they do it too. Now, I've been talking about dromedary camels. They're in Arabian, the one hump camel. You see the Christmas camel. Yeah. The ones that the Weizmann rode. But there was also the Bactrian camels, which are from Asia, Afghanistan area. They have the 2 humps. They were domesticated early on too, but not before the dromedary. They were domesticated about 2500 BC. So they did actually get beat out by the horses. But we've had dromedary camels, then horses, and then Bactrian camels was the order of events on that. Now, the Bactrian camel did beat out the llama and the alpaca for being domesticated by about 100 years. However, alpaca and llama, again, are part of the weird domestication process that they were doing in the New World. Yeah. Llamas were used as draft animals. They're not good at pulling things, but they are good at carrying things strapped over them. So they would they have a strong back for that. So they would often have them carry baskets on either side of them as a pack animal, or they could sometimes have them pull like a flat because they didn't have wheels. Anyway, but another purpose that llamas had that was the supplemented for was in place of the sheep, and it's wool, because llamas and alpacas have wool that they can harvest to make clothing and blankets and things like that. So that is the camelids that were domesticated, and mostly in the southern hemisphere, but on opposite sides of the world, you have 2 groups, and the camels proper were used as draft animals and steeds, whereas the South Americans were just draft animals and meat mostly, but they served the bonus purpose of providing fiber for clothing. All right, now we're moving right along. I didn't realize I was going to drag this on so long. I can talk and talk.
Learned so much. It's great.
Next one's kind of fun. So when you looked at that timeline that I sent to you, the The ones in the red boxes were blown up because they were so tiny. But were you surprised at all by the fact that honeybees have been domesticated longer than horses?
That was very interesting. I did not expect that.
Yeah.
Not that I knew much about bee history, but yeah, that was surprising.
Yeah, I know. I know an annoying amount of information on bee history. I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet. First of all, I want to say about bees. This doesn't necessarily have anything to do with their domestication, but it does have something to do with their relationship. Man, I did talk about entomological warfare a couple of weeks ago. Was that last week? It might have been a couple weeks or the week before. But entomological warfare is using animals in war. Bees were the first animal to be used as such because we would you could take a beehive and toss it into your enemy's cave or whatever and drive them out. So yeah, fun fact about bees. But that was before they were domesticated. That's still wild bees. But the fact that bees produce honey, bees produce wax, bees pollinate crops. The Egyptians took advantage of that very early on. So 4000 BC, right? The Egyptians are raising bees, a different species of bees than what we have now. I should say different subspecies, because Egyptian bees are a subspecies of Apis mellifera, but mainly we use the European honeybees from Europe. But the Egyptians were all about it. They had they developed wax and honey as a garnish, and is their contribution to the spice to the early spice trade, right? So another fun fact about bees is that when it comes to domestic animals that were introduced to the New World first, bees were introduced in 1612. So they've been here longer than allegedly longer than cats.
So there were no American species of bees?
Oh yeah, there are lots of American species of bees. There are still lots of American species of bees. They just don't produce. They haven't been domesticated, so they don't produce as much honey.
I see what you're saying.
When they actually wiped out, that's what when people misunderstand about the Save the Bees campaign. It's not about the domestic bees. It's not about European honeybees that you see all over the place. Those are fine. I mean, and when they do experience their hive collapse and their dieback, when the murder hornets come in and start killing them, that's because they're finally being ecologically checked, where they've had the free run because their natural predators didn't live over here, which included the Asian giant hornets. So yeah, they kind of had it coming. They're a domestic species. So when people say save the bees, and you think that they're talking about a European honeybee, it's like saying save the birds, and you think they're talking about a chicken.
Okay.
So they're domestic animals, and they have supplanted the native bees populations. And I don't want to make this. I can make the rest of the show about bees too, so I won't harp on that too long. But yes, we have had the bees domesticated for a long time and spread them just as potently as we did cats to every corner of the planet to contend with the natural environment, and with us being able to selectively breed ours to perform a certain task, whereas nature just uses sculpted by the natural ecology, we can make them bigger and stronger and outcompete the native populations, which is what we did with the Western honeybee. Yes, now we are finally to horses, which again, they first appear on the menu, not on the not as a draft animal, but on the menu is when we started using horses, and they were a staple diet on the Russian steppe. And you laugh, but our ancestors all ate horse. I mean, you ate some kind of equid in your diet even before we were officially Homo sapiens. We were hunting horses and eating horses and equids. But the horses that the domestic stock they descend from were, for a long time, they were thought that they were extinct. But then they checked the genes, and this Przewalski, I don't know to say that last name terribly, and I apologize to anybody who's I don't know what language it is. I think it's Russian, but I apologize, I won't say it again, but these wild horses that were kind of like the tarpons, which is another species of small wild horses, but you look at them and they're kind of floofy. They have like really soft, fluffy fur and bristly zebra-like mohawks. Now, zebras don't have the temperament to be domesticated. You can tame a zebra, but you're never going to domesticate it. It's kind of like an ostrich, right? Ostriches were another animal that were on the verge of domestication that was just kind of abandoned, but that's a topic we could get into if we have time at the end here. But when it comes to horses, they allowed humans to spread information at a rate that we never could before. That is the impact horses had on the world. Over land, you could spread messages from the tip of Spain to Japan in just a matter of weeks by going from horse to horse. And the Mongols really brought that to the forefront because they came in with these small, fast-running horses that Europeans never seen before. You know, they were war horses, I guess you would call them, but they weren't like the war horse. Because in Europe, when you think of a war horse, you would think of a big horse that would be able to carry heavy armor and go into battle. But these horses were made for going into battle and out and flanking, and because their riders were archers, right? So that is, to me, that's the most impressive thing horses have ever offered to society, is the ability to spread these messages. And this method was so effective that we used it from the 3500 BC. That is, let me pull up my chart here. That is going to be the Neolithic period up until the Industrial Revolution. We used this
even after.
That's how effective horses were and how efficiently we were. And as I said, the only animal that's in more sports than horses are cows, which is kind of I thought was really freaking surprising, but that's a weird statistic. But horses are used in a variety of sports. You don't think about horses as meat, and you don't think about them as leather in Western society, but they did. Country places where they still do, where eating horses is not an uncommon practice. It's starting to get dark. I can light myself up.
I have a funny horse story. Remind me to tell you one day.
Okay, I definitely will. Now,
about eating horses, that is.
Eating horses? Well, there's other sports. There's a sport in Mexico that people play that I don't want any part of with horses. But yeah, the European culture specifically benefited a lot from horses, especially in the area of Turkey. They allowed for the same. So I was talking about donkeys in Africa, allowing them to be able to pull plows. Horses were pulling plows. Horses were pulling wagons. I mean, we developed the wheel in light of horses. You know, it was wheelbarrow with it, and then you attach it to a horse. There you go. But yes, that was where we went with that particular lineage of equids, and I think that we did at some point along the lines. And I'm just going to touch on this because it's not really a topic, because you can't sustain. They're not sustainable. But mules were something early on that humans learned to do to get that strength of a donkey to pull, but the back like a horse that you could ride, carry more weight riding. So mules are great for that, and pull wagons and things of that nature. Now, like I said about the horses, they were really important for spreading culture, but there was the next thing on the list was even, I would argue that it's more important, whether because we had the Silk Road, right? And this heavily kept secret of Eastern mysticism where they made this incredible substance that the whole road was named after it, silk, right?
Yep.
For the longest time, the Western societies, they just loved this material. It was soft and could be used for sails. Was the main thing? They're using it for sails. Made clothing. The Silk Road. Yeah, they traded spices, they traded jewels and precious metals, but it was silk was what caused this thing to cut across this huge continent where they were riding those horses. That road had been cut a long time by people trading silk, and it wasn't until much later that Europeans discovered where the silk. And I got a thing I'm doing on this soon, so I'm not going to go into too much detail to spoil it. But they did have to figure out where this was coming from, and finally had some spies sorted out. But for a long time, society was driven by the way that societies crossed over and cultures meshed and new plants and new crops and new animals. This road that was cut for silk. That's how we got the chickens. We talked about chickens. Yeah, they made their way to Europe on the Silk Road. That's where we first got them from. That's just another way that moths help chickens take over the world too, I guess. But that is also contributed to the wealth of China during the medieval period. China was famously wealthy during the medieval period. After the fall of Rome, that's what people, when you thought about a rich nation, you thought about China. You thought about this. They didn't call it, what was the name they called it back then? I'll remember it if I stop trying to think about it. There was it's Canta something. Anyway, Titan knows. What was the ancient European name for China? I know you do. But that was luxury, right? And it was because they had these secret moths that spun this amazing material. And there might be some misunderstanding about spider silk, but it's never been used. It's never been able to be cultivated to any extent to actually do anything worthwhile with. There's like one that it took like thousands of, or not thousands, maybe it was dozens at least of seamstress to make this one dress from spider silk, and they made it over years. So spider silk is not nearly as viable as silkworms, at least not until we start doing genetically modified spiders. Then we'll see. Cathay, thank you, Cathay. That was the word I was looking for. I knew that he would know it. I know. You call it. All right, and about the same time that they were developing these incredible silk-producing little organisms in China, the Mediterranean basin did have a lock on another method of communication that was unseen and unprecedented and still used, much like the horses. But actually, kind of still used, because horses, they stopped using horses in war in the war of
in combat. It was 19th century, but as a means of transportation, they were used well into World War I. Like 1920.
Another animal that was used in World War I to help spread messages. Yes, that's what was going on in the Mediterranean, because they realized that, and it's funny to think about, because this is speculative, of course, but bear with me here. So, pigeons, right? Rock doves have a bad habit of just pooping all over everything. So you can imagine the people that were tired of having pigeon shit all over their property, capture these pigeons with a blanket or something, threw it over them and captured them, took them. We're going to tie them up, load them down in the wagon and drive them 500 miles away and let them go. And by the time they get back home, the pigeons are back. Do it a couple of times and they realize, hey, if we take one of these birds with us when we go, to the city or whatever, we can send a message back to you with this bird. So incredible, right? That's how that came about. But pigeons were, delicious too. Apparently, they were the popular. Again, as I mentioned, the Silk Road. We didn't have chicken until the Silk Road in Europe, right? So, um, the pigeons were a favored poultry item in ancient times. They were the when you see people like old Roman art with a bird on the table, it's usually a pigeon or something or some other related bird called or even a squab, which is less appetizing because I believe that's a corvid. Now, other birds were also being domesticated as well. At the same time period, we had the domestic goose being bred in Europe and Egypt and China. So they were another food bird. Now, we do breed geese so heavy that they can't fly anymore today, but that wasn't always the case. So sometimes it was seasonal when you could have goose or not. But then they figured out, if we can keep them here and domesticate them and fatten them up, we can have them year round. Squab is still eaten today. Yeah, squab is pigeon. Okay, so that's the right term. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Titan. It's good to have a fact checker in the audience.
Right. We'll bring Titan on part 2 of this discussion.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So next on the list, we got, we covered the yak that was domesticated, the Bactrian camel, llama, alpaca. The guinea fowl was also filled the same role as the chicken, much like how the ass filled the same role as the horses and bovids in Africa as far as a draft animal. The guinea fowl filled the same niche as a chicken, but something that you could keep around, and if you keep it fed, it'll stick around with you. You could eat their eggs. You could they can protect. Actually, they're more aggressive than chickens, so they'll actually attack people. I mean, chickens will too, but guineas can be pretty vicious. All right, and then there's something that didn't make the list because I couldn't find any good information on it. But apparently, there was a dog called a Fuegian dog that was domesticated in South America that's extinct now, and it was domesticated from the Colpeo, the Indian fox. Interesting, but I couldn't find enough information on it to include it or include any details on it. So maybe I'll explore that at a later point. Yeah, let's see here. And turkeys. Now we're up to turkeys. Yeah, happy Thanksgiving.
That's right.
So turkeys were a bird that was domesticated in the New World as well. They weren't domesticated from the species of turkey we have up here in North America, though. They were domesticated from a smaller but much more colorful Mexican species of turkey that's still around today, but they're much, much smaller than our wild turkeys up here, and much, much smaller than the domestic turkeys we have now as well. Domestic turkeys are another animal. When I was talking about the pigs and the chickens being bred so big that they can't that's like not healthy for them. Turkeys are another animal that we were able to selectively breed to be just a big, massive, useless ball of meat. But turkeys can also serve a purpose of being a guard animal, especially if you have other birds like guineas or ducks or chickens. The male turkey, a tom turkey, will consider them part of his flock and protect them vigorously from all comers, up to and including dogs and big cats. So
really?
turkeys don't fuck around. They're like llamas that way. I didn't mention that about llamas or asses, but both llamas and asses also served as guard animals because, like what I said about the camels, that you can raise llamas with a herd of sheep or with a herd of cattle. You can raise asses with a herd of sheep or with a herd of cattle, and they will protect them like that they're their own herd, even though they're different species, and they are particularly aggressive. There's a reason why why the equids of Africa are total badasses and couldn't be domesticated because zebras pack a hell of a kick and donkeys are famous for their kick. Anyway, moving along. So turkey is another game bird. The next thing we have is a Prussian carp. Are you familiar with Prussian carp? Have you ever?
I've heard of carp. I didn't know there was a specific type.
Yeah, Prussian carp are the most popular domestic fish in the world.
Really?
Yeah. I'm surprised you didn't know that. Yeah, everybody's the people for a long time they keep them in little bowls, but they've decided that's unhealthy for them. So goldfish don't do well in the bowls like we used to think. But yeah, Prussian carp are goldfish, or the ancestors to goldfish. Okay. And it's an interesting experiment in gene selection. So in China, they would raise these is for food, or they're like a livestock. They keep them in little ponds and selectively breed them, ornamental, and again for food and such. But they started to notice that some of them would have a yellow hue to their scales, and a white hue to their scales, or whichever color. There'd be a variety. I mean, now we have goldfish in every color of the spectrum, right? But or more red, more orange, more yellow. But they would so they started to selectively breed the ones that would come out to those colors together until they created stable populations that just have those genes, and the natural colors, the wild colors, become rare in the germline, right? Then suddenly no longer appear nearly as common as these reds and oranges and yellows and whites that they were selectively bred for. And they started doing that in 300 CE. So just at the time of the Roman Empire in China, they're selectively genetically, they're doing genetics. They're doing basically Mendelian genetics with fish, and they don't even know what they don't even realize what they're doing. They don't even realize that, hey, this is Mendelian genetics, because Mendel's still how many 2,000 years in the future almost. So they're doing these wild experiments to selectively get these different colors of fish in their koi pond, or in their ponds. Koi were something that followed up, but koi were a little bit later. Koi came into play in the 11th century. Same process though. They were bred from the Amur carp though. This was in Japan, because Japan had a Amur koi. Or sorry, Amur carp, but they start off silver, just like the Prussian carp were, and they found the genes to make these different colors, and suddenly were able to produce these unique strains of different colored fish for their ponds. Obviously, the ornamental applications preceded the food applications in these carp, but people still do eat carp. I hate trying to bone a carp myself. It's a process. They're really, really bony, and the meat doesn't taste nearly as good as catfish. So it is what it is. Another thing that you may or may not know about when it comes to goldfish, before we move away from the fish, is that goldfish are used in sports. I didn't know if you knew that or not.
What sport uses goldfish?
Well, nothing humane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No goldfish.
Yeah, that is a prominent use of them. A pastime that is linked directly to their original breeding, though. That was one of the originals. Like when they have goldfish festivals, that'd be one of the things is goldfish swallowing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right, and the next thing we have is rabbits. So rabbits were actually bred by monks initially. They would breed the rabbits for food in their own isolation, because they wouldn't have the funds necessarily to go to market, so they would breed their own rabbits. There's a few things that have their origins with initially being bred by monks, but I know rabbits were the main one I wanted to touch on. And I'll be frank with you, I don't know much about the history of the domestication of rabbits, other than it follows the same genetics that we established with the goldfish and the koi, with getting the different color molts. And we will see this again and again moving forward, because most of what we're seeing from here on out is going to be changes in colorations, not so much as morphology. Obviously, with rabbits, there are excellent exceptions, like Angora rabbits that get massive. There's rabbits that get really super fluffy. There's rabbits that they're bred to have ears that go for days. There's rabbits that are athletic. There's rabbits that are used for meat. There's rabbits that are there are rabbits that are used as grazing animals to control for weed control. Yeah, but for the most part in Western society, we think of a rabbit as a pet. So yeah, that's rabbits, and they kind of align with the way that guinea pigs were handled in South America a little bit, but rabbits were much later. Last few things I'm going to talk about. I got one more animal, and then the rest of what I'm going over here is mostly going to be like lab animals. So the last one to talk about that has a use outside of pets or laboratories was the canary. Now, canaries' practical application from the 15th century on, they were used to go down in a coal mine for you, because due to the delicate respiratory systems of songbirds, any gas leak in a mine will cause the canary to drop dead well before it impacts a human negatively. So they would bring a canary down with them into the coal mines in order to keep track of whether the air was safe and breathable or not. So yeah, that's where canaries really shined. Obviously, pets are what we use them for mainly today. Canaries will fight too, so they are used in sport and fighting sports, but pretty much any animal that you can think of has been used in sport fighting before. So, now we come to kind of the groundwork laid by the guinea pig, because while guinea pigs were initially great for lab research, so much so that the term "use me as a guinea pig" or "I'll be your guinea pig" is becoming vernacular now, even though they were supplanted by other rodent groups long time ago, which is mostly rats and mice. Lab rats and lab mice are definitely more common than guinea pigs in any field of research now. They'll call them fancy rats or fancy mice. They're genetically isolated to be different colorations. They're white and piebald and spotted and albino. They selectively breed these recessive characteristics into the genome. They do the same thing with minks too. Don't get me wrong. Minks are right up there with them as far as laboratory animals go. And yeah, fruit flies are another lab animal that we've genetically isolated to get the effects and the results that we want. And the last thing that I will talk about that we've actually had some physical changes with are going to be the hedgehogs, which the domestic hedgehogs are unique. Now, there are two animals that I put on my slide that, according to Wikipedia, are only partially or semi-domestic, but I always consider them domestic animals. Those are the elephant, domesticated as an animal of labor, transportation, and prominently in the golden age of Rome as an animal of war, as a battle animal. They were
Carthaginians.
Yeah, and they were popular in the Colosseums all throughout. No matter where you were in any corner of the Roman Empire, you could go see an elephant at the fights, whether you were in Northern Europe or whether you were in heart of Africa.
India too, yeah.
India has a lot of cultural ties to elephants, and India they have the howdah, which is like it's basically a little house that you put on the back of an elephant that you can kind of.
Yeah.
Um, but elephants are intelligent, long-lived animals that you need to form a proper relationship with. I hate seeing the way that circuses and other performing acts abused elephants and other exotic creatures. The last animal I'm going to touch on that was in the slide, but it's only because it's semi-domestic, is the reindeer. So I would say the reindeer is as domestic as the feral species of sheep that we talked about, the ones that you could still pluck the wool out of. They're at that stage of domestication. They're genetically unique from wild populations, physiologically unique. You can look at a reindeer next to a wild its wild ancestors. We call them caribou over here, but you can look at them and see the differences between the two. I think the common name for them over there was is it elk, or I don't know what they call them in the steppe. But yes, so reindeer filled a similar niche for these people in the Sami people and in indigenous groups across northern Asia. They filled the same niche as horses, as donkeys, even as cattle to these folks. So they rode them as mounts. They had them pull wagons and sleds. They would use them as food. They would use their pelts for fur or for clothing, and they would use their antlers to make tools and such. So yeah, they were very much part of the domestication process. They were just, again, like what all the projects I said that were abandoned in South America. I don't want to say reindeer were abandoned, but they were just kind of like put on the back burner because we had other animals. But when it comes to viability and cold climes, yeah, reindeer are pretty hardy. All right, so that's all I have.
Awesome.
Almost 2 hours of me, like I talked nonstop.
That's great. That's why I invited you on. So, Bree, if you want to plug your channel again and tell people where they can find you and what you're about, we'll close it out here.
Yes. So my main channel is Hive Science, where we do live from the hive on Saturdays and talk about all kinds of interesting topics. We do Cryptic Corner, Creation Watch, and yeah, please drop by and hang out every Saturday morning at 9:30 Central Standard Time. My new channel is Battle for Gaia, which is a zoology channel about animals. And I have actually tonight, I am doing my first live stream on that channel. If somebody wants to drop the link to that in the side chat here, this will be the first time that I go live on Battle for Gaia. And I'll be discussing, doing my first live installment of Bree's Bestiary, where I will be talking about hyenas.
Nice. Well, I really like the previous video you posted on Battle for Gaia. I was very interested. I'll also link that in the description of this video if you want to find out.
Thank you,
Bree and her channels. Thank you, Bree. It was very educational. I learned a lot. Really appreciate it.
Happy to yammer for 2 hours. Sorry about it.
No, don't have to apologize. Thank you,
I'm sorry.
everyone.
Hold on. Before I say anything, yes, beta fish were on the list, and they do have almost exclusively ornamental and gambling history. So Titan pointed out that we skipped the beta, which they're kind of like the fancy pigeons that we do breed for the big floofy feathers, but they're bred for their big fancy fins. All right, go ahead and close out. I'm sorry.
No worries. That's it. Thank you again, Bree. Thank you, everyone in the chat, for showing up. Titan, I'll message you about episode 2 of this, and I'll see you all later. You all have a good night. Peace out.